My name is Baruch. I'm developer advocate with JFrog, JBaruch on Twitter, and jbaruch@jfrog.com on email, and so it goes. You got the idea. We have a bunch of products. One of them is Artifactory. It works with Docker, and I cannot comment what the frog does with the whale on this picture, because I understood the kids are watching, so I won't. We do stuff around a lot of things, including Docker. Paul, who's using Docker? Who's using Docker in production? Almost no one. Everybody use Docker, not in production. The question is why. We see it a lot, and we believe that this is why. Everybody likes Docker, not so much trusted, because Docker, it's a pretty opaque and dark thing. We have another layer of abstraction. Something is going on, we're not sure what's going on. And that's because we cannot be sure that what we put there is what's there. So how can we know it? We promote it through a lot of steps. And this is a promotion pyramid that you know. We start with a lot of very fast builds and end up with a couple of very slow builds. And we promote them through quality gates. So you can see here a binary that goes through different stages in the pipeline, separated by what we call quality gates. The binary goes through it in a normal software, but not with Docker. Why? Because Docker build is to blame. Docker build is a very simple and very powerful command. You know Docker file, the format is awesome, it's very, very powerful what you can do. And that, of course, brings us to do that. We trend to run Docker build every time we need to build a Docker image, which is fine, but sometimes we do that. Instead of promoting the binary through quality gates, we start to promote the Docker file, the Docker build file, and build it on each and every stage of our pipeline. And that's a problem because fast and cheap builds are not always the way to go. True image, Shanghai, China, fast build, not very reliable, right? The problem is Docker build file is extremely unstable. This is a true image. I wanted to build one myself, but then I just Googled the first Docker file I found, and this is how it looks like. It's horrible. Every line here is running dependency management, building on the latest version of some artifact. We can fix it. We can try, for example, nail down the version of the base image. Will it help? No, because security updates are keeping going into existing stable version without changing the version number. How about now? Is it any better? Yes, the checksum actually nails it down. The problem is it's unusable. We don't know which version it is. What about all those? We can nail them down. What about a bunch of other stuff that we can put there? It won't work. What we end up is we run Docker build in production, we got an image, and then we run the same Docker build a couple of other times. We'll probably get different results because of what you see. The only way to do a solid Docker build that we can build on is building it once and then promoting immutable and stable binaries through the process. As we spoke about in the beginning, as we do with normal software, not Docker. So we should end up like that. Again, building it once and then going through all the stages of our CI pipeline with immutable artifact. Is it easy with Docker? Not so much. That's what we want to do. We build it once, we have the image, and then we promote it inside our binary repository without changing it. The problem is Docker. We have some tram-tam limitations in Docker, like this one that you probably remember. And in Docker, the main limitation is how the Docker tag is structured. The Docker tag itself have a very limited things that we can put inside. First, where this Docker image comes from. That's a very strange decision. Why it should be on the tag, no one knows. But then it's just the host, the port, and then the name. We cannot put there anything else. And that's a problem as well. It's a 45-minute talk that I tried to speak 9 times faster than usual. Didn't really work. But you can read more in our blog post for April 5th, or you can come to the webinar in 2 weeks for the full version.